Welcome to Are You Pre-Processing Your AL Code? Hey, I'm Eric, and in this video we're going to talk about the preprocessor in AL, which is a relatively new thing we have gained in the world of Business Central nav development. But it's not really a there's clearly a not invented here sign above it, because it's something that has existed, especially in C. I think it was actually born in C since 1973, I think. The way it works is that you can insert commands into your source code that tells the compiler what to do for some specific cases, perhaps what not to do. So you have the option of changing the behavior of the compiler based on certain conditions. And actually, let me show you something here. This is not AL. This is C code, and it's from, there's some of the source from something called Lua, which is a language that I used to be very involved in, not so much anymore. And I just kind of opened a random file here, and we can see that this is actually, this is the header file, this is the C file, so we can see that there's some lovely looking memory management C code here. But if we go back and then we zoom in on, actually let me zoom in, there we go. You can see that at the beginning of this file there's a bunch of lines that all start with the hash, the number sign, whatever you want to call it. In Danish we call it a garden fence gate, something, garden gate, I guess. Anyway, we can see that it says if ndef. So if lmem_h is not defined, do something. And it starts by defining this guy, and then we can see that there's actually a associated ndef down here at line 41. So what this, and this is classic C style, that if this file is included in a lot of places, you can see that we have an include command here. So somewhere else we might have an include lmem. So even if the same file gets included more than once, it will not define what's in it more than once, because that will result in an error, and that's the way C works. Anyway, then we can see that in this case you're also using define to define some messages. What that means is that if in the C code you use code M anywhere in the code, that will get replaced with this string. And we can see that we also use to define function calls. So we're defining a call called lua m_free, takes a state and a whatever that is, that's a pointer to a block, and actually that will just call the realloc function that takes the state, the pointer, and a 0. So change a allocation to be 0, that's the same as freeing it in C language. Anyway, and we can see here that if debug has been defined, if def debug, then we're declaring two more variables. So if we go look in the implementation, we can see that if not debug, then there's lots of code. Otherwise there's like, let's go, we don't want to look at the grow function, but if not debug, then this is kind of the code as you use for release. Otherwise we get debug, and then there's a bunch of check functions and stuff like that. So it's a whole different set of implementations that we have. So that's how C have been working for almost 50 years, and C++ for that sake. And what has been done in AL is not really the same, because we can do so much more with the preprocessor in C, but well, there's clearly an inspiration. So let's take a look at what it actually is. So here is my my little app, and actually let's just see if this will even come. So we have some symbols, so that's great. So the classic, oh, there we go, now it works. So in this case we have the classic thing that we can publish. So if we run this guy, come on BC, let me make sure that we're actually using the right browser behind the scene, otherwise things get complicated. Come on BC, you can do it. Deploy, there we go. This is a very, very slow sandbox. Maybe it will. Let's make it bigger. That might help it. There we go. Huh, that took a while. Anyway, so we got our app published, right? So now we can go in and say, okay, let's try to use some of the same function. So in C it was called if-def. In AL you just do if. So let's do if something. Then we can do else message something else. So now we have two message commands in our code. So let's deploy this guy again. And we need to have an end if on this one. Now we'll deploy it. So if something message something else message something else. So there's two message statements now here. We have not done. I just wrote something, and we have done nothing. So the only thing we've done to our code are those 3 lines of code here. Let's see what happens. Something else. And why is that? That is because the symbol something has not been defined. So we could go up here somewhere, and then we could say define something. Now we have that. Let's see why. Cannot, sorry, and yeah, let me go up here and do it proper. Oh, haha, there you go. So while that deploys, so now we are defining something. And we're back to the first message. So now we can kind of decide, well, are we running the are we running the debug version or the release version, or are we doing something specific in this version of the app? So when we're doing a define, that is only in this page, so in this, within this object. So I guess within this file actually, but we could figure that out at some point. So the other way we can define something is to go into our app.json and look for the preprocessor symbols and tell that we want to define something. So now something is defined, and something is defined across the entire app. So if I deploy this again, and I would have suspected that I write that wrong. Something interesting. No, sorry, that's right. Man, poof, brain fart. Yeah, that's right. Because otherwise we say something else. So this is a global define of this. So let's actually, just for a second, let's create a new file. Let's create a table here. Preprocessor, and pre is code and pro is text, and preprocessor is cool and fun to play with. Is a number. That's a great table, right? So we got a table, and let's say that this is an app that you both are you're deploying or selling or whatever word we're going to use as an app source app and as an on-prem thing. And what we need to think about in that case is that a app source app uses different number series from a PTE app. So we could do something like this and say if app source, and then let's copy this table statement here. Then we'll do else, then we'll do end if. So let's go back and see, I already did that ahead of time. How cool is that? So if we, let's close this one. So now we have two table lines at the beginning of our file. So let's compile this one. And then I'll just use the cool functionality from the ALA set function to look at the app file I got and see, okay, we got a table and the table number is 50100. So if I go back in here and then say, okay, let's define this to be app source. I compile again. I look at, I close this one and I look at this guy, and now the table in our app file, the compiled app we just did, the table number is now our 70 million number. So it's not just where are we? Sorry, I lost. There it is. It's not just regular code. It's still something like this that we can say, okay, we're pre-processing this file. So and that is exactly, let's actually talk for just a second. What does it mean? Pre-processing means that you're manipulating the file before we're processing it by the compiler, which means that from the everything has sign here in this case, It's pure text manipulation. It's not compilation. It's just text processing before the compiler takes its place. So some other languages or text highlighters, syntax highlighters, will then gray out the one that's not values not correct. So in case of if app source is defined, then this one will be highlighted and this one will be grayed out. But the AL syntax thingy is not doing that yet. But that would be cool though. So this is a great way of controlling if you have an app that you're both doing app source and PTE of, then you can actually keep it like this and just define in the app JSON before you compile. Unfortunately, it's not possible to inject it as a parameter to let's see if I got that here somewhere. I think it's okay. Let's see if I can make this big enough for you guys to see it. This is the ALC, so the AL compiler, and at right now I don't see any way of setting preprocess symbols. It would be pretty cool, but maybe in the future. That would be pretty cool. Okay, so those are defines, and well, we can do more than just if, else, and if. We can also do if, and then there's an else if combined, so you can stack a bunch of else if to like create a pseudo case statement. You can define and undefine and stuff like that. So that's pretty nice. Another thing you can do is that you can also create what is known as a region. So we can create a region like this and say fields, and then do a end region here, and that will give you folding. So now we can collapse. I don't know that we're collapsing fields here anyway. So you can define like big sections of a source saying we're collapsing this is something with the region command. So that is pretty nice also in some cases. Then the last piece of the preprocessor is what is known as pragmas, and pragmas are a message. So this is actually not to be clear. So what we have done right now, so all the defined stuff, I'm manipulating the source file before the compiler touches it. The regions, the compiler doesn't care about that. The regions are only a help for viewing and collapsing. The last part is really actually part of the compiler thing. So see here, I created a field that the field name is too long. So at this point I'm getting an error. I'm getting the AL0468, and perhaps not exactly this error, but it's a great example. Perhaps it's okay to get that error or get that warning, because, or not error, get that warning, because I know what I'm doing. So don't come here and give me all those warnings. But what we can do is that we can do what is known as a pragma, and the pragma is telling that we can say warning disable. And the warning we want to disable is 04968. And either we just leave it like this. You see, as soon as I had this, the warning went away. Or I could perhaps make it better and say, okay, pragma warning, restore. So in case I had another field down here, because you can never have too many fields. So in this case, you can see that now we disabled AL0468 for this field, but it's actually enabled down here again for that field. There's also a way to do if we had the implicit width. So if we created a procedure test here saying that, doesn't really matter what we do, so we say that pro equal something. Actually, I'm not sure we'll get that warning, but there's a way to with a pragma telling that we don't want the implicit width warnings. I don't think that's really, I have never used it, so I'll just choose to ignore that one. And I'm just looking at the time here and saying, wow, okay. So I think that's where we're gonna stop this. I use this with the app source syntax actually, because we have some of our apps are both for on-prem and for app source, and those are some of them are actually in different normal series because historical reasons, that some of it started as a PTE, but others has on-prem uses stuff that's different than on-prem because the on-prem version does not have all the bells and whistles that the cloud version have. So if you're trying to use a function that is only available in the cloud but not on-prem, then you get an error, but then I can define myself out of that. So that's a exciting technology from 1973, now in AL. So let me know down in the comments below if you're using this, what you're using it for, and if you think it's useful, and anything else. If you want to write me a message, you know, I'm always reading all that stuff. So until next time, have a wonderful day, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.